Hi everybody and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Only 5 months after its last chop and extend, my philodendron atabapoense has already reached the top of its moss pole again, so well, it's time for another chop and extend. And I thought it's a good opportunity to show you this process again, because I wasn't really sure if it's going to work with this one in the first place. So let's quickly throw it back to 5 months ago. Another chop and extend today, and today's victim is philodendron atabapoense. So it's just about to reach the top of its pole, so it's time to give it a chop and then re-extend it so it can continue climbing. Now today I want to try something slightly new. Normally I just take the top cutting, I pot it up and I re-extend that. But today I actually want to combine the top and the bottom cutting into one pot and then re-extend it. The philodendron atabapoense is different to any of the other climbers that I've done a chop and extend for so far, as in the roots are kind of climbing up the moss pole. Normally the plant's throwing roots down the moss pole and into the pot. What that means is that some of these nodes down below have potentially rooted all the way into the moss pole and the roots are coming out the top of the moss pole. What that means is when I chop it and I pot the top back up, there might be roots in that moss pole that I now had to cut. I can't free them all. This has rooted like crazy. So I'm not even going to bother trying to free any of the roots. I'll definitely have to cut through them. Which means that there might be some roots left in that pot that aren't actually connected to any node, which means they will die and will rot, meaning that there might be some rot within my moss pole eventually. That's kind of what I'm worried about. I don't usually have the problem because if the roots go down and I just continue using the top part, then really that is a problem that the bottom part of the pole would have, but I usually take that apart anyway or just use it for further propagation purposes. It's not really gonna last forever anyway. So anyway, I just wanted to be really open with you with, the things that that potentially couldn't go according to plan. All plans are different, so suppose I'll find out, right? Alrighty, so here we are with the two poles. I'm just going to combine them next to each other. Or two poles in here. I'm only going to extend one of them. I'm only going to extend the one with the larger leaves on here. That other one is going to reshoot from the top, and then that new shoot I'm going to redirect towards the same moss pole, so that ultimately both shoots will then grow up one moss pole, and once they reach the top of that moss pole, then I'll chop it and then I'm back to my normal just one moss pole, but this time with two plants on it rather than just with one plant on it. So I thought that's a good strategic decision, but proof's in the pudding, so I suppose I will let you know. And then let's quickly throw it back to 2 months ago. So first things first, I don't think there was any need for me to worry about the roots. I personally haven't noticed any issues. There might be some roots inside that pole that were growing up and then I chopped it and now they're kind of dead. It could be I can't see them and I haven't noticed any adverse reaction by my plant based on it. So if that's the case, it might be there, but don't fix what's not broken, right? So I don't think there was any need to worry about the root system at all. If anything, this plant has increased its root system like crazy. There are so many roots going all the way up into that extension already. There are roots sticking out the top of the extension. So this plant has taken really, really well to its new extension and created a huge root system. That bottom part that I kept in here also has many, many new roots popping out at the top over here. So quite clearly, this plant has rooted really well into its original pole and the new extension and has established a really nice large root system and didn't seem to be too phased by the chop at all. And that main cutting that just keeps growing up the pole, happy as ever. That bottom part of the pole that I kind of, normally I don't keep that bottom part because I don't have enough room. So normally I give that away. And that bottom part did reshoot in 2 spots, exactly as predicted. So the top 2 nodes both gave me a new shoot. Or that top node gave me the primary shoot. It's quite large. It's already gotten a decent sized stem, quite thick, and it grew quite quickly. So I was able to slowly start manipulating it to start growing on that extension. So on that extension, I now have 2 plants growing on it. Well, and now we're here. You can see there's 2 shoots that have now reached the top of its moss pole. This thicker one was the main shoot, and then this smaller one, that's the new shoot of that second pole, or the old pole that I kept on here. So basically now I really doubled the impact of this plant by not just extending the top of the pole, but also keeping the bottom of the pole with it in the same pot. But now I want to chop it, and now I'm just going to do the single extension as I normally do. So really that bottom part of the old pole really just served to have that second shoot on here without me actually having to propagate. I hope that makes sense. This atabapoense has always rooted like crazy for me, and all of the roots are growing up the moss pole. So at the moment there's 5, 6, oh geez, I don't even know, up to probably almost 10 roots sticking out the top of the pole. So I'm gonna pop a new pole on here and they're gonna keep growing. The only other thing I've done in preparation for today's chop and extend is I chopped the actual stems already. So there was I just cut a chunk of stem out here, and I cut a chunk of stem out here a couple of days ago, just so the cuts can actually dry out. And cutting the stem before I pot it up and giving it a chance to dry out and callus over is just hopefully going to reduce the chances of rot. I personally haven't had any stem rot after any of my chop and extends, so I reckon whatever I'm doing works, so I'll just keep doing it. Alrighty, first things first, I'm gonna chop the cable ties that connect the two moss poles. So when I potted them up, I use a couple of cable ties just to connect them at the beginning, but by now these two poles would really be held together by a lot of the root system as well that has grown from this pole into this pole. So at the moment it's going to be quite hard to actually separate them. I will definitely have to chop some of the roots. So I'll do that first. Perfect. So if I see any roots over here, I'll just have to chop them. That's exactly what I did last time, and the plant didn't seem to mind. And then the other thing I have to do is I'll have to cut the cable ties that actually connect the pole to that garden stake. That garden stake is really just a tool I use to easily re-extend the moss pole, but at the beginning it's also giving it a little bit more stability. Whoop. All right. I mean, you can see that over here. Look at these crazy roots and how they've all grown up. So apparently plants grow roots up the moss pole in an attempt to secure themselves to a host. So in nature these plants are epiphytes, so they like to grow up a host, which in nature would be a tree, and in my garden it's a moss pole. Alright. I just have to chop through this over here. I cannot actually try and save any of these roots. That would be too crazy, but from experience it's not really needed anyway. But what that also means is that I will have roots that have grown from a bottom node over here up the moss pole, but I basically just cut them. So I will have like dead roots in there eventually, and that was my initial concern when I did that chop and extend with my atabapoense the first time around, because I've never really done a chop and extend with a plant that grows roots up the moss pole. But given it was a success the first time around, I'm just repeating it now, so I feel more comfortable, and proof is in the pudding. That was easy. So I now have one convenient moss pole, but with 2 shoots on it, whereas initially I just started it with 1 shoot. So it makes it, well, twice as lush. And that is the part of the plant that I'm going to keep. As you can see, there's a lot of roots over here. Some of these might not actually be attached to anything anymore, so I'll try and get rid of those where I can. But it's gonna be really, really tough. Like this root, for example, would go all the way to the top. It's now no longer attached to a node, which is obviously not ideal, but I still can't really completely get rid of it without ruining the whole moss pole. So this is going to be an imperfect process. The chop and extend definitely works best if the roots go down, not up. But I mean, that's not really my choice. That is in the plant's DNA. I usually also try to remove as much moss from the bottom as possible, because I'm going to pot it up in my chunky aeroid mix and I don't want too much water retention. But I mean, it's hard for you to assess that through the camera, but if I squeeze it, I can just feel so many roots in there, and if I try and pull some moss out of there, it's very hard. So I don't think I'm going to be super successful in removing a lot of moss. But from experience, I would say it doesn't make too much of a difference if you can remove the moss. So basically, remove moss in this part of the pot that is going to be potted up, then that's probably preferable. It's just a way for you to prevent any rot due to the high moisture retention capacity of moss. But it doesn't mean that you will have root rot if you don't do it. I am not able to remove the moss, or I have not been able to remove the moss from many of my propagations, and I haven't really noticed any issues. So it's all good. I'm just making sure that the mix in itself is as chunky as I can. So you know how I do my normal aeroid mix? Well, I try to just kind of scrape the surface of it so I get all the chunky bits and not so much the finer bits from the bottom of the bin. That's more for smaller plants. Let's see how I go with that. And if you didn't cut the stems beforehand, I would just let it dry out for like an hour or two before you then go ahead and pot it up. But again, if your potting medium has a decent aeration and drainage, you shouldn't really have to worry too much. Plus, obviously, don't water too much. I don't really ever compress the medium. I just give it like a quick shake or a quick tap, just so everything can fall into place. But really my goal is for this medium to have a lot of air pockets in there. These air pockets are basically humid air, and that's what these aeroid roots are absolutely gonna love. I also just went back to a 20 centimeter pot with this one. The previous one over here was in a 25 centimeter pot, but that was because I potted both poles next to each other. So the old one and the new one are potted next to each other. So what I could do right now is I could take this one and pot it next to that as well and basically have three. But I don't need, I think as it is pretty nice and lush already. And in this new place, I'm actually struggling with space. I don't have enough space for the plants that I already have, so I do not need to triple plant my plants. Really, the idea behind potting them next to each other was just so that I get one shoot on the extension and then the second shoot from the old pole also onto the extension. And that's exactly what happened. I now have those two shoots on here, is exactly what I wanted, without having to go through a propagation period. I used the actual method of growing it up a moss pole as my propagation method, if that makes sense. I really hope that makes sense. I feel like I've spoken about this a few times, specifically with this plant, but if it doesn't make sense, then I'm sorry. It makes total sense in my head. And probably if you've grown something up a moss pole before, it will also make sense. Sometimes you just have to have done it to kind of... Anyway, I'm sure if it doesn't make sense, somebody in the comments is going to let me know. So now I'm just repurposing the garden stake. I am not going to extend this one. I could totally extend this one. Both of them are just going to reshoot again. The top node is usually the one that will get all of the growth hormones. So I could totally re-extend this as well. But again, I'm running out of space. So yeah, that bottom part, what I'll do is I will sell it. I will probably bring it down to AJ's. Anything that I've got to sell, anything that I don't need anymore, I'll always bring down to AJ's. And that gives me room for new plants, yay. Or maybe I should put it in the garden. I mean, this one is already in the garden, so no. I'll show you where this one lives now going forward. Alright, so I just took the garden stake, I connected it to the original pole, just with 2 cable ties. And now I'm taking a new moss pole, same one. All of my moss poles are always 90 centimeters tall and 6 centimeters in diameter. So I'm just topping up the old pole with a little bit of moss, and then I'm chucking the new one on top. And this is where the garden stake really has its best moment. I really tried and make this chop and extend method a technique that I can easily do by myself, so that anybody that can help me can rather film than hold the plant. No, I mean, realistically, I've done probably 95% of my plant activities by myself. To me, doing these sort of repottings and like what other people consider plant chores, that is actually the part of the hobby I probably like the most. I love that. Like on a Saturday or Sunday, just, you know, repot some plants, make some moss poles, look after them, rearrange a little bit. That is the part that I really like. So I made sure that it's something that I can always do by myself whenever I have the time and I don't need to rely on another person. So that's why I put the garden stake on the outside. You could technically put it on the inside as well if you want to, but I just feel like it would make it really messy and a little bit chaotic. With that garden stake on the outside technique, it just makes it so easy. I'm just reconnecting these two moss poles with more cable ties so they kind of stay together, and eventually the roots will take over and they will hold them together properly. Alrighty, and honestly that's it. I mean, you've seen me just pot it up. I didn't do anything. This is held in here just by, I don't even know what's holding it in there, but it just works. I think it's because my aeroid mix is so nice and chunky and it's super light. There's honestly no weight at that pot. So, and you've seen it, I didn't push it in there or anything like that. Honestly, it just works. It must be some physical force, like the friction is greater than the gravity. I don't know. All I can tell you, it works. But if you're worried about it, you can totally like cable tie the pot to the pole as well. I personally just find there's absolutely no need to. Alrighty, and let me show you where this plant now actually lives, because it no longer lives inside. It actually lives outdoors, right here. Right, and to keep it safe, I just got these hooks. These are the hooks that I use for all of my other larger moss pots in the other courtyard as well. I just put it in here and then here, and that's it. So I'm just going to make a little cavity at the top of the moss pole that fits the bottleneck. And I'll pop the bottle in here. And this is now just going to empty by itself over the next few minutes or hours. Honestly, it doesn't really matter how fast it goes, as long as it goes, and it's just going to drain through and then through the pot as well. Well, that's it. I hope you enjoyed this little chop and extend tutorial, and I hope that's something that you want to try and do yourself as well. I can highly recommend it. It's honestly the best way for me to propagate all of my plants. It's the best way for me to continuously grow my plants up moss poles and enable them to mature. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll link my moss pole playlist over here so you can find out how I make my moss poles, how I water my moss poles, my aeroid mix, and so on. Pretty much everything I know about growing plants is in that playlist, so I would love for you to check it out. Bye, and see you next time.